6 months ago, the Mafia boss buried the woman he loved. Tonight, he walks into a hospital and finds her alive, holding his newborn baby. But as he takes her hand, a bullet shatters the glass, and a single truth will destroy everything he ever believed. The Mafia boss thought his ex was dead, until he finds her in the hospital with his baby. The night was cruelly quiet, one of those nights when even the city seemed to hold its breath. The streets glistened under a thin layer of rain, reflecting the pale glow of hospital lights at the top of the hill. St. Helena's Hospital stood like a lonely fortress against the storm, its windows flickering, its corridors whispering with secrets. The smell of antiseptic mixed with faint traces of blood and bleach, a scent Peterson Black had long learned to ignore. He wasn't there to heal. He was there to make sure no one else could hurt him again. Peterson's boots clicked against the wet floor as he entered through the emergency doors, his long black coat trailing behind him. Beneath the coat, blood seeped from a fresh gunshot wound along his ribs. He didn't flinch. Pain was a companion he'd grown used to. It was silence that scared him now. The receptionist, half asleep and unbothered, barely lifted her head when he walked past. One look into his cold gray eyes, sharp as razors carrying the weight of 100 buried sins. And she didn't dare ask for a name or form. Everyone in this city knew better than to question Peterson Black. He was the kind of man whose name people whispered only in locked rooms, the head of the Black Syndicate, the most feared crime empire in the region, the man who decided who lived, who vanished, and who got buried under silence. Yet tonight his face wasn't carved in rage or pride. It was hollow, tired, bleeding, and burdened by ghosts he couldn't bury deep enough. The crooked doctor he had come to see owed him a favor, a debt from years ago when Peterson had saved his wife from a rival gang. That was his reason for being here. Or so he thought. Fate, however, had other plans waiting for him down the corridor. As he walked through the dimly lit hallway, his heavy footsteps echoed like a slow heartbeat. Nurses rushed past him, pushing stretchers, whispering to each other, too focused to notice the blood dripping from his side. He was about to turn toward the surgical wing when a sharp, desperate cry sliced through the silence. A woman's cry, raw and fragile, echoing through the corridor. It stopped him mid-step. His instincts, the same instincts that had saved him countless times, told him to keep walking. But his heart, the one thing he thought he'd buried with his past, betrayed him. He turned toward the sound. A group of nurses was wheeling a woman into the labor room, their voices urgent, overlapping. "She's losing too much blood. Get the oxygen ready," one of them yelled. Peterson stood frozen. There was something hauntingly familiar about the curve of her face beneath the oxygen mask, the way her hand trembled as she reached for something, or someone, unseen. His pulse began to pound, the rhythm sharp and disbelieving. For a moment, he convinced himself it was a hallucination. Maybe he'd lost too much blood. Maybe the ghosts were coming for him at last. But then, as they passed under the white hospital lights, her face became clear, pale, beautiful, broken. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. His breath caught. His throat burned. He blinked once, twice, but the image didn't vanish. The woman under that mask, the woman whose fragile hand reached toward the air, was Vina. Vina. The name slammed into his chest like a bullet. The woman he had buried 6 months ago. The woman whose body he'd watched lowered into the earth. The woman whose death had carved out what was left of his soul. He staggered back, gripping the wall, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. The noise of the hospital faded, replaced by the ghostly echo of dirt falling on a coffin, the hollow sound of a gun salute in the rain. He had seen her dead, or at least he thought he had. Her car had exploded on a highway burned beyond recognition. His men brought back what little they found, and he buried her with his own hands. That night, he swore he'd never love again. He swore he'd never feel again. Yet here she was, alive, breathing, bleeding, giving birth. His heart was a battlefield of disbelief and pain. The doctor he came to threaten vanished from his mind. Every step he took toward that stretcher felt like wading through the ashes of his own grief. "It can't be her," he muttered under his breath, voice rough, trembling in a way he hated. "She's dead. She's dead." But then she spoke. Peterson. Just his name, whispered through cracked lips, faint and trembling, but enough to tear his entire world apart. Her voice was softer, weaker, but it carried the same warmth he'd memorized, the same warmth that used to ground him when everything else burned. His heart stopped. He felt the world collapse around that single sound. For a man who had killed without flinching, Peterson felt his knees almost give way. His body reacted before his mind did. He rushed toward her, pushing past the startled nurse who yelled, "Sir, you can't go in there!" But she was too late. The storm inside him had already broken. The woman he buried was alive, and nothing on earth could stop him from reaching her now. Vina's eyes fluttered open for a second, unfocused but filled with something deeper. Fear. Her trembling hand brushed his wrist as the nurses struggled to wheel her into the delivery room. "Peterson," she gasped, voice breaking, "you shouldn't be here." Her words made no sense to him. Why shouldn't he? She was alive, she was bleeding, and she was carrying... Carrying what? A nurse tried to push him back, snapping, "If you're her husband, you need to stay out of the way. She's losing too much blood." The word husband burned in his ears. He hadn't heard it in months. It made him realize how empty those months had been. 6 months of vengeance, 6 months of drowning himself in blood and alcohol, trying to erase a ghost that now lay breathing in front of him. He looked at her face, pale and drenched in sweat, and for the first time since her supposed death, tears stung his eyes. They weren't the kind that came easily to him. They were the kind that clawed out from somewhere buried deep. He reached for her hand, but the nurse pulled her stretcher away, shouting, "We need the room cleared now." "Vina!" he called, his voice shaking with desperation and disbelief. She turned her head slightly, her eyes half open, pain and fear mingling in their depths. "They'll kill him," she whispered, her voice barely audible beneath the beeping machines. He froze. "Who?" he demanded, stepping closer, but her words were drowned out by the noise around them. Nurses rushed, machines beeped, doors swung open and closed, but that last line, it lodged deep inside him, gnawing at his chest. "They'll kill him," before he even takes his first breath. The phrase repeated in his mind like an echo from the grave. Her voice, her fear. It wasn't just for herself. Someone else was in danger, someone she'd risked everything for. He didn't understand yet, not fully, but he knew one thing. Vina wasn't supposed to be here, and if she was, then someone wanted her dead again. The nurse at the door barked, "Sir, please, if you're her husband, you need to wait outside." But Peterson didn't hear her. His world had narrowed to the trembling voice behind that door, the sound of Vina's screams rising again. The hallway spun. His pulse thundered in his ears. Every instinct screamed at him to go in, to protect her, to demand answers. But before he could move, the double doors to the labor room slammed shut in his face. He stood there, breath ragged, fists trembling, eyes burning holes through the frosted glass. The seconds felt like hours. The smell of blood was stronger now, the air thick with tension. Somewhere inside, a machine beeped. Steady, then faster, then slow again. He pressed his palm against the door, whispering her name as if it could pull her back from whatever darkness she was fighting. He didn't know if it was grief, hope, or madness that was driving him. But he knew one thing for certain. The woman he buried was alive, and whoever had stolen her from him once would not do it again. With a deep breath, Peterson pushed open the labor room door, ignoring the shouts of the staff. The scene inside froze him to the bone. Vina lay half-conscious, tears streaking her face, her voice trembling with terror. Her gaze locked with his, pleading and full of pain. "Peterson," she whispered again, her words breaking like glass. "They'll kill him, before he even takes his first breath." And as the machine screamed and nurses shouted orders, Peterson felt the world shatter around him, because he realized she wasn't talking about herself. She was talking about a child. Their child. 2. For a heartbeat. The world was nothing but the ragged sound of Vina's breathing and the shrill chorus of machines. Peterson stood at the foot of her bed, blood from his own wound soaking through his shirt, his pulse hammering louder than the storm outside. The lights above flickered, painting her face in flashes of white and shadow. He moved closer, every step an act of disbelief. "They'll kill him before he takes his first breath." Her words echoed through his skull like a curse he couldn't escape. His throat tightened. "Who, Vina? Who wants you dead?" But she only shook her head weakly, her hair plastered to her damp skin, her lips trembling with pain and secrets. She reached for him, fingers cold and trembling, clutching his sleeve with desperate strength. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice breaking with each word. "They think I'm dead. If they see you, if they find out you know, I'll lose everything." Peterson's jaw clenched, fury slicing through the fog of confusion. "You vanished," he said, his voice low and sharp as a blade. "They told me your body was found in the wreckage. I buried an empty coffin, Vina." His voice cracked on her name, a sound he hadn't allowed himself to speak in months. Her eyes glistened, guilt and love tangled in their depths. "That was the plan," she confessed, tears spilling freely now. "I had to die to keep him alive." He froze, the words twisting like wire around his heart. Him. Before he could speak, Vina's body convulsed in pain. The doctor shouted orders, nurses rushed in, the smell of antiseptic thickened. "She's crowning, we need to deliver now," someone yelled. Peterson's instinct screamed to take control, to shield her from everyone, but all he could do was stand there, powerless for the first time in years. He, the man who ruled empires and commanded death, couldn't do anything but watch as Vina fought for life. "Breathe, Mrs. Black," the nurse urged. Vina's eyes snapped open at the sound of her name, a name she hadn't dared to use since the day she disappeared. Her gaze locked with Peterson's, and for a fleeting second, they weren't enemies of circumstance, but the couple they used to be. Two broken souls bound by something fierce and unspoken. A scream tore from her throat, raw and guttural. Peterson flinched as it cut through him, reminding him how mortal she was, how fragile everything he loved had become. Then, amid the chaos, another sound emerged, smaller, sharper, infinitely more fragile. A cry. The world stopped moving. The cry grew stronger, thin, desperate, beautiful. A baby's cry. Peterson's knees nearly buckled as the doctor lifted the tiny body into view, wrapped in white cloth, slick with blood and life. His heart thudded unevenly, eyes wide with awe. The doctor's voice sounded distant, muffled by the rush of adrenaline in his ears. "He's healthy. He's alive." Alive. The words struck him harder than any bullet. He stared at the child, his child, and time blurred. He couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The tiny chest rose and fell with stubborn rhythm, each breath a defiance against everything dark that had tried to erase this life before it began. Vina's trembling voice broke through the silence. "He's yours," she whispered, the words trembling with relief and sorrow. The nurse hesitated, then placed the baby gently into Peterson's blood-stained hands. For the first time in years, those hands that had ended lives without hesitation, shook uncontrollably. The warmth of the infant's skin seeped through him, disarming every wall he had ever built. He looked down at the baby's face, soft, peaceful, untouched by the violence that surrounded him, and something inside Peterson cracked open. The ruthless mafia boss who had buried love now stood trembling, undone by the weight of his own child. Tears stung his eyes before he even realized they'd fallen. The baby's tiny fingers curled instinctively around his thumb. That single touch shattered him. It wasn't power. It wasn't fear. It was something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Vina watched him through the haze of exhaustion, a weak smile flickering across her lips. "You need to hide him," she whispered. Peterson looked up sharply, his heart hammering. Hide him? From who? Her eyelids fluttered, her breath uneven. From the men who destroyed us. From Adam. From the ones who made me disappear. Her voice grew faint. They'll come when they know he's born. His blood turned cold at the name Adam, his most trusted man, the one who stood beside him through every war. But this wasn't the time for questions, only survival. A nurse adjusted Vina's IV, whispering, "She's lost a lot of blood. She needs rest." But Peterson couldn't rest, not when every instinct screamed danger. He took a step closer to Vina's bedside, the baby still cradled against his chest. "You planned this?" His voice was low, barely controlled. "You let me believe you were dead, just to protect him." Her gaze softened. "If I told you, you'd have burned the world to find me. They'd have killed him before he was ever born." Peterson swallowed hard, his throat thick with emotion. He wanted to hate her. He wanted to rage at her for the nights he spent drowning in grief. But looking at her now, pale, bleeding, still fighting for their child, all he could feel was the hollow ache of love he could never kill. A small sound escaped the baby, a hiccup followed by a soft whimper. Peterson adjusted his hold instinctively, his hand trembling against the fragile heartbeat pressed against his chest. For the first time, he understood fear, not of bullets or betrayal, but of losing something pure. The doctor wiped sweat from his brow. "She needs surgery," he said quickly. "She's hemorrhaging. We can't afford any distractions." Peterson hesitated. Leaving her felt impossible. "You'll keep her alive," he growled. It wasn't a plea. It was a command. The doctor nodded nervously. "I'll do everything I can." He wanted to believe that, but Peterson had lived long enough to know that promises inside hospitals meant nothing when enemies lurked in shadows. A faint thud outside the window broke his thoughts, a sound too heavy to be wind. He turned, every muscle coiled. Rain lashed against the glass, but behind the streaks, a shadow moved. Quick, deliberate. His pulse spiked. He adjusted his grip on the baby, stepping instinctively in front of Vina's bed. The flicker of movement vanished as quickly as it came. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe it was death circling back for what it had missed. He looked at Vina again. Her breathing had slowed, her body fragile against the white sheets. "Stay with me," he murmured, his voice breaking. "We're not done, Vina." Her lips curved into a faint, exhausted smile. "You were never supposed to see me again," she whispered, barely conscious. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering on her skin. "And you were never supposed to die," he said quietly. For a brief, aching moment, peace settled between them, a fragile truce in a room filled with ghosts. The baby's tiny fingers brushed against his chest, grounding him in a reality he didn't yet understand. Then, a sound that shattered everything. A single gunshot cracked through the night, slicing the calm in half. The window exploded inward, glass raining over them like glittering knives. Peterson ducked, twisting his body to shield the baby. The infant let out a terrified cry. Vina screamed. Alarms blared. Smoke curled through the air, sharp and metallic. He looked up through the shattered window into the rain-streaked dark and saw the unmistakable glint of a rifle barrel retreating into shadow. His blood ran cold. Someone had found them, and they hadn't come to miss twice. 3. The gunshot still rang in Peterson's ears as smoke curled through the air, acrid and heavy. the metallic scent of blood mixed with antiseptic, twisting his stomach. He clutched the baby close, his arm aching from the force he'd used to shield them both. Vina was trembling on the bed, eyes wide, her breathing shallow but alive. The shattered window groaned against the wind as rain swept into the room, cold droplets splashing across the floor tiles like scattered tears. Another second of stillness, and then Peterson moved. The Mafia boss in him woke up like a demon dragged from the pit. He laid the baby gently beside Vina, his every movement precise despite the chaos. "Don't move," he said in a voice so low and controlled it could have frozen the air. "Lock the door. Stay down." He reached beneath his coat, fingers brushing the cold steel of his gun, the familiar weight grounding him. He stepped over the broken glass, eyes sharp, breath steady. Outside, the corridor lights flickered violently, as though even the electricity feared what was about to unfold. Peterson eased the door open, his gaze slicing through the corridor. No nurses, no doctors, just silence, and a long trail of water and boot prints leading toward the far wing. His pulse slowed into that deadly rhythm that had earned him the name Black Death. He followed the trail, each step silent, predatory. But when he reached the corner and caught sight of the security mirror on the wall, the world tilted. In the reflection, behind the dull shimmer of rain-streaked glass, a silhouette moved. A man in a black coat, tall, broad-shouldered, standing with his gun lowered and a faint smirk curling across his face. Peterson's heart didn't want to believe it, but his mind already knew. Adam. The name burned like acid in his veins. His most trusted lieutenant. The man who had stood beside him through wars, who had sworn loyalty when the rest of the underworld wanted his crown. The man who had brought him Vina's death certificate, who had buried the coffin with him 6 months ago. Peterson's breath turned ragged. "No," he muttered under his breath, the word raw, disbelieving. But the mirror didn't lie. Adam was there, standing in the flickering light, waiting and smiling. Peterson's hand tightened on his gun as rage boiled through the cold discipline that had always defined him. He stepped out from the corner. The sound of his shoes against the wet floor broke the silence like thunder. Adam turned, casual, like this was just another business deal. "You were supposed to die with her, boss," Adam said smoothly, his voice dripping with mock respect. "But you always did have a way of ruining plans." Peterson's jaw clenched, his muscles rigid. His shadow fell across the hall like a storm cloud. "You planned the explosion," he said, not as a question but as a death sentence. Adam's smirk deepened. "You were slipping, Peterson, losing control. You let her in. She made you soft." His words struck like blades. The Empire was rotting. And I did what had to be done. The words hung heavy in the air, cruel and matter-of-fact. Peterson's grip tightened on the gun until his knuckles whitened. "You murdered my family for power?" he hissed. "For control." Adam shrugged, his eyes gleaming. "Don't make it sound so personal. You were losing your edge. I gave you a reason to disappear, to be feared again. But you survived, like you always do." He tilted his head, taunting. "Only this time you've got something to lose again, don't you? That's your weakness, boss." A flicker of doubt crawled across Peterson's face, but fury drowned it before it could surface. The storm outside wailed through the shattered windows, lightning flashing across Adam's face, carving his smile into something demonic. Peterson took a slow step forward, gun raised. "You should have finished the job." Adam's expression hardened. His gun came up, matching Peterson's. For a moment, two men who once trusted each other stood in perfect stillness, death balanced on the edge of a trigger. Then faint footsteps echoed from behind, a nurse's hurried cry, a door creaking open somewhere down the hall. It broke the tension like glass under pressure. Adam laughed softly. "Always interruptions, huh?" His tone was bitter amusement. That woman never could die quietly. Peterson's finger tightened on the trigger, his breathing calm but deadly. His voice dropped into a whisper of finality. You betrayed me for power, Adam. Now you'll die for it. Adam tilted his head, still smirking. Before you pull that trigger, boss, maybe you should ask yourself, why Vina's still breathing? The words sliced through Peterson's rage like a blade. For a heartbeat, his focus wavered. What are you talking about? He demanded. Adam's smile was pure poison. You think she survived on luck? You think she vanished on her own? Someone helped her disappear. Someone paid me to make it look like she was dead. His tone turned mocking. You really think she didn't know who? Peterson's stomach twisted. The gun stayed steady, but his hand trembled with barely restrained confusion. You're lying, he growled. Am I? Adam whispered. She made her own deal, Peterson. She traded something, or someone. You should ask her what she promised to stay alive. For a split second, Peterson's certainty fractured. Memories of Vina's terrified eyes, her whispered warnings, her insistence that he stay away, all of it now tangled into a darker truth. He took another step forward, fury and heartbreak burning in his chest. You're trying to twist this, he said through gritted teeth. You killed her, not saved her. Adam chuckled, low and cold. I didn't have to kill her. She was already willing to disappear if it meant protecting that baby. But tell me, boss. His smile faded into something crueler. Did she tell you who the baby was really meant to protect from? Lightning exploded outside the window, and for a heartbeat the hallway lit up like a stage. Peterson in shadow, Adam smiling like a ghost. Both guns raised, both men breathing in sync, both waiting for the other to move first. Behind Peterson, somewhere far off, the sound of a baby crying pierced the storm. It was faint, but enough to rip at something inside him. His focus sharpened again, his instinct screamed to end it, to silence the betrayal that had stolen everything from him. Say one more word about her, Peterson hissed, and you won't live long enough to regret it. Adam took one deliberate step closer, eyes burning. Then shoot, but when you do, you'll never know what she's hiding from you. The moment stretched to breaking. The tension was unbearable, time frozen between one heartbeat and the next. Then, Vina's voice, soft but desperate, echoed down the corridor. Don't kill him. You don't know what he's holding against me. The words hit Peterson like a blade through his chest. His finger froze on the trigger. The sound of her voice, weak, trembling yet filled with something he couldn't name, ripped through the fog of rage. He turned slightly, confusion clouding his eyes. Adam smiled faintly, sensing the hesitation, his shadow merging with the darkness. Told you, he murmured. And in that suspended heartbeat, everything changed. The storm outside, the cries inside, and the unspoken truth Vina had just confessed to with those few haunting words. Peterson lowered his gun just an inch, torn between love and vengeance, as Vina's voice trembled again from the darkness. If you kill him, you'll kill me too. The hallway felt colder after Vina's voice sliced through the air, her desperate plea freezing Peterson in place. His gun trembled slightly, his breath uneven as the echo of her words. If you kill him, you'll kill me too, hung like smoke between the three of them. For a man who had seen empires fall and cities burn, that moment was the first time he truly felt powerless. His world, once ruled by iron control, was now collapsing under the weight of secrets he didn't understand. He turned slowly toward her, his eyes clouded with fury, confusion, and something dangerously close to heartbreak. Vina lay weakly against the hospital bed frame, her face ghostly pale under the dim fluorescent light. Her breathing was labored, her hand pressed against her side as if to hold herself together. Yet it wasn't pain that made her tremble. It was guilt. Adam's smirk widened from the shadows, feeding off Peterson's hesitation. "She didn't tell you, did she?" he said softly, his tone cruelly amused. "The deal she made to save your miserable life." The words dripped like poison, deliberate and slow. Peterson's jaw tightened. He didn't look at Adam, not yet. His gaze was locked on Vina, waiting, needing her to say something. Anything that would make sense of this chaos. But she said nothing. Her silence was a wound deeper than any bullet. "Vina," he said finally, his voice hoarse and dangerous. "What is he talking about?" Vina's lips parted, but no words came at first. She seemed to shrink under his stare, her eyes shimmering with tears that refused to fall. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper that broke him in half. "They threatened to kill you, Peterson." Her fingers clutched the bedsheet like a lifeline. "I gave them everything, your roots, your contacts, your secrets. It was the only way they'd let you live." The world tilted around him. The hum of the lights, the rain hammering the windows, even the baby's soft cry down the hall, all of it blurred into white noise. His breath caught in his throat, and when he spoke again, it wasn't the voice of the man she once loved. It was the voice of the Mafia king whose empire had just been stabbed through the heart. "You traded my empire," he whispered, each word like shattered glass. "For my life." Vina's tears fell silently now, one after another, tracing the hollow of her cheek. "And for our son," she said, her voice breaking on the last word. "They promised they'd never come for him if I cooperated." The silence that followed was unbearable. Adam's slow, mocking clap echoed through the corridor. "A love story wrapped in treason," he said, his smirk curling into something venomous. "Poetic, really. The queen betrays the king to save his crown. Too bad the kingdom still burns." Peterson moved before he even realized it. In one swift, brutal motion, he swung his arm and struck Adam across the face with the butt of his gun. The sound of impact cracked through the air, sharp and final. Adam stumbled, blood spilling from his lip as he hit the wall and slid to the floor. Peterson stepped closer, eyes burning with the kind of rage that could only come from heartbreak. "You think this is a game?" he growled. Adam spat blood, still smiling through broken teeth. "It always was, boss. You just forgot who was playing." Peterson's fist met his jaw again, and this time Adam went limp, unconscious, collapsing into a heap. The world seemed to exhale with him gone. Only the storm outside dared to speak now. Peterson turned back to Vina. His chest rose and fell in uneven bursts, his breath trembling between anger and disbelief. "You should have trusted me," he said, his voice low, cracked with emotion. "You think I wouldn't burn the world for you? You think I wouldn't have killed every last one of them to keep you safe?" Vina's eyes met his, shimmering with a sorrow so deep it almost looked peaceful. "I trusted your heart," she whispered, "but not your world." The words fell between them like a confession and a curse. Peterson took a step closer, torn between the urge to hold her and the urge to walk away before his rage consumed them both. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the toll those 6 months had taken. The dark circles beneath her eyes, the scars barely hidden under the hospital gown, the way her hands shook even when she tried to be strong. She had been living in the shadows while he was living in vengeance, and now those two worlds had finally collided. He sank into the chair beside her bed, elbows on his knees, gun still dangling loosely from his hand. The storm's reflection flashed across his eyes, turning them into twin shards of lightning. "You gave them everything," he muttered. "My roots, my safe houses, my people. Do you know how many will die because of that?" Her chin quivered. "I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," he snapped, but his voice cracked at the end. He looked away, his hand trembling, his thumb brushing the edge of his gun like he needed its cold steadiness to survive. "You made me bury you," he whispered. "You made me believe I killed you." "I know," she said softly, "and every day since then, I've lived in that coffin with you." The words hit harder than any bullet. For a moment, Peterson's eyes softened, and the ruthless man inside him faltered. But before he could respond, a faint cry echoed from the corner of the room. The baby's voice, fragile, innocent, rose again, slicing through the tension. Vina's face turned toward the sound instinctively, her tears glistening in the half-light. That tiny cry reminded them both of what truly mattered. Peterson stood, pacing toward the bassinet where the baby lay wrapped in a white blanket. He brushed a finger over the child's cheek, his hand trembling. "He doesn't deserve this world," he murmured. "Not mine. Not yours." Vina nodded weakly, her eyes closing as exhaustion tugged her under. "Then change it," she whispered, "for him." Peterson turned to her again, but before he could speak, a noise cut through the silence. A hurried set of footsteps, quick and uneven, echoing down the hall. He stiffened, every instinct sparking alive. His hand went to his gun, his body tense. The door burst open a moment later, and a nurse stumbled in. Breathless, her eyes wide with panic. "Sir," she gasped. "What?" Peterson barked. The nurse's face drained of color. "Someone's taken the baby." The words detonated in his skull. He spun around. The bassinet was empty. The white blanket lay crumpled, still warm. The sound of rain roared louder, drowning the world. Vina's scream tore through the room, raw and broken. Peterson's gun slipped from his hand, clattering against the tile. For a single heartbeat, everything went silent except for the hollow sound of his pulse pounding in his ears. Then his eyes turned to steel. The Mafia king was gone. What replaced him was something far more dangerous, a father whose blood had just been spilled in a different way. He took one slow breath, his gaze locked on the shattered door where the nurse stood trembling. "Lock this floor down," he growled, his voice low and lethal. "No one leaves this hospital alive until I find my son." The nurse hesitated, her lips trembling. "But sir—" "Now," he snapped, his voice slicing through the chaos. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, echoing his fury. Somewhere in the storm, a shadow moved, a figure slipping through the darkness, a baby cradled in their arms. And Peterson Black, drenched in betrayal and blood, was about to start a war that would drown the city in vengeance. In the distance, over the storm's roar, a single cry rose and faded into the night. Peterson didn't know if it was his son's voice or his own breaking in half. The sound of Vina's scream still echoed in Peterson's head as he tore through the hospital corridor. The sterile lights flickered above him, painting flashes of white across his furious expression. The storm outside clawed at the windows, rain streaking like tears across the glass. The walls vibrated with panic, nurses shouting, footsteps scattering. But in Peterson's world, there was only one sound that mattered, his baby's fading cry. His heart pounded against his ribs, every beat demanding blood. The Mafia king had been resurrected, and this time, he wasn't hunting for power. He was hunting for his child. "Seal every exit!" he bellowed, his voice a thunderclap that froze everyone in place. The hospital security team, trembling under his command, scattered in all directions. His hand gripped his gun with brutal precision, every step echoing like a death sentence on the polished floor. His instincts, those razor-sharp, battle-hardened instincts, pulled him toward the east wing, toward the emergency stairwell. The air was thick with adrenaline and disinfectant, a suffocating mixture of chaos and fear. Then he saw it, a flash of black, a figure sprinting down the corridor, a small bundle clutched tightly in their arms. His son. Peterson didn't hesitate. He fired a warning shot, the sound exploding through the hall like lightning. The bullet tore through the intruder's leg, sending him sprawling. The cry of the baby pierced the noise, raw and terrified. Time slowed. The masked man stumbled, the tiny body slipping from his arms, falling through the air. Peterson dove, his arms stretched out, catching the baby just before he hit the cold, blood-slick floor. His heart stopped for a moment, holding the fragile weight of his child against his chest. The baby whimpered softly, alive. That sound, fragile and pure, ignited something monstrous inside him. He stood, cradling his son in one arm and his gun in the other, eyes burning with merciless fury. The injured man tried to crawl backward, clutching his leg, his mask half torn. Peterson stalked toward him, each step echoing like the ticking of a bomb. He grabbed the man by the collar, slamming him against the wall so hard that the plaster cracked. "Who sent you?" Peterson growled, his voice low and deadly. The man's breath came out in choked gasps. You shouldn't be alive," he wheezed. "They said you were gone, buried." Peterson pressed the barrel of his gun to the man's throat. "Answer me before I make that true for you." The man's eyes flickered with panic. His hands trembled. "They know. She's alive," he coughed. "Adam wasn't alone, there's more. They've been watching you since the hospital fire." Peterson's blood turned to ice. Every nerve in his body screamed danger. He glanced down the hall toward Vina's room, his heart clenching. Without another word, he crushed the man's throat with one violent motion. The body went limp instantly, falling to the floor like discarded trash. The baby whimpered again, drawing Peterson back to reality. He looked down at his son, the child's tiny face streaked with tears but breathing. Safe, for now. Peterson's hand shook slightly as he brushed a thumb across the baby's cheek, whispering a promise under his breath. "No one touches you again. Not while I breathe." But when he turned toward Vina's room, a new dread settled in. The door was wide open, the curtain fluttering from the broken window beside it. His stomach sank. "Vina," he muttered, stepping inside. The bed was empty. Her IV line dangled to the floor, blood staining the sheet where she'd been. The faint smell of her perfume still lingered in the air, rose and fear, and on the pillow a single folded note lay waiting, sealed with a trace of her tears. Peterson stared at it for a long moment, his chest heavy, before unfolding it. "Don't find me, Peterson. They'll kill you if you do." For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The paper trembled in his hand, his jaw tightening until his teeth ached. The storm outside roared louder, mirroring the one building inside him. He looked around the room again, searching for any trace of her, any sign that this was some cruel trick, but there was nothing. She was gone. Again. The monitor beside the bed beeped weakly, the sound fading like a dying heart. He stood in silence, the weight of loss pressing on him until his knees almost buckled. He had her back for barely an hour, and now she was ripped from him once more. The universe seemed intent on tearing them apart piece by piece. He turned, eyes sharp, scanning the window. The glass was cracked, the wind howling through the gap. Outside, the parking lot glistened under the rain, streaked with red lights from the hospital alarms. Somewhere out there, she was running. Somewhere out there. She thought she could keep him safe by leaving him behind. He clenched his fist, crushing the note in his palm. "You can hide from me, Vina," he whispered, his voice trembling with a dangerous calm. "But you can't hide from fate." He tucked the baby closer to his chest, his coat shielding the child from the cold. He could feel the tiny heartbeat against his own, fragile but strong, proof that his bloodline still pulsed through the world. His world, however broken, wasn't ending yet. It was only beginning again. A shadow moved in the corner of his vision. He spun instantly, gun raised. It was one of his men, Luca, breathless and drenched from the rain. "Boss," he said, panting, "the cameras caught her leaving the East Side exit. But there's more. You need to see this." Peterson followed him down the hall, the baby's faint whimper muffled against his chest. They entered the hospital's security room, the flicker of monitors casting a ghostly glow across their faces. On the screen, grainy footage showed Vina limping through the rain, clutching her side, blood soaking her gown. But what froze Peterson's veins wasn't just her. It was the two black SUVs idling at the curb, men in masks waiting, headlights cutting through the storm like blades. "She wasn't running from me," he muttered under his breath. "She was running to protect me." The baby stirred again, as if feeling his father's turmoil. Peterson's hand tightened protectively. He turned to Luca, voice low but firm. "Get every man on the street. Check every camera from this block to the docks. If she's bleeding, she won't get far, but neither will they." Luca nodded and ran out, barking orders into his comms. The room's lights flickered as thunder cracked overhead. Peterson looked at the footage again, his reflection staring back at him from the screen, a man reborn in fire and loss. He knew this was more than a kidnapping. It was a declaration of war. He lifted the baby slightly, cradling him closer. "They want a war?" he whispered, his voice turning to steel. "Then I'll give them one." He glanced once more at the note in his palm, its words bleeding from the rain that had soaked it. "Don't find me." But he knew better. He'd find her, no matter the cost. He'd find the people who dared to touch his family, and he'd show them what it meant to draw blood from a king. As he walked out of the security room, his footsteps echoed like gunfire. The baby's soft cry was the only sound that softened the storm in his chest. But even that innocence couldn't drown the fury rising within him. Somewhere in the city, Vina was fighting her own battle, and soon their paths would collide again, in love or in ruin. The storm outside thundered louder, lightning slashing through the sky. Peterson paused at the exit, rain already seeping through the cracks of the door, his silhouette dark and unyielding. His eyes narrowed. "Let the city bleed," he murmured. "They started this. I'll end it." And as he stepped out into the storm, the baby's cry faded into the night, carried away by the wind that whispered her name. His whisper cut through the rain like a vow to the heavens. "You can hide from me, Vina, but you can't hide from fate." Thanks. The mansion was silent, yet Peterson could still hear the echo of Vina's last words. "Don't find me." They haunted him like a curse whispered through the walls. Each night, when the baby's soft breathing filled the nursery, he stood by the window, watching the city burn beneath the clouds, and promised himself that silence would not win. He had lost her once. He wouldn't lose her again. Days blurred into nights, nights into endless hunts. The empire he once ruled with an iron hand became a battlefield of ashes. He tore through every alley of the underworld, dragging men out of their hiding holes, demanding names, answers, anything. Some called him mad, others called him possessed, but those who looked into his eyes saw something far worse than either. Grief sharpened into vengeance. Rumors spread like smoke through the city's veins. They said the devil of the East was looking for a ghost. They said he no longer slept, no longer bled. They said his heart had turned to stone. And maybe they were right. Because every time Peterson closed his eyes, he saw Vina's face fading beneath hospital lights, her tears glistening like glass, her voice whispering his name one last time. Weeks passed. His men brought reports, none worth believing. Every lead ended in blood, every trail in fire. Still, he pressed on, his world narrowing to a single obsession. He didn't care about the business anymore, or the power, or the throne he had built with his bare hands. All he wanted was her. One night, under the red glow of a dying sunset, Peterson's convoy rolled into the outskirts of the city. The buildings there looked like skeletons of forgotten lives, crumbling walls, broken windows, shadows moving behind curtains. That's where he found it. A black market clinic tucked behind a junkyard, its signboard half burnt, its air thick with rot and secrets. Inside, the doctor trembled at the sight of him. Peterson didn't speak at first. His silence was enough to make the man confess. The doctor's words spilled like oil across the floor. "She came here, a woman, hurt badly, said she couldn't go to the main hospitals. They forced me to patch her up." Peterson's pulse spiked. "Who forced you?" His voice was low, deadly calm. Men, the doctor stammered. Men with the mark of the black serpent. They said she was important. They said if I spoke, they'd burn this place to the ground. Peterson's jaw tightened. The black serpent. Adam's secret network. For the first time in weeks, Peterson felt something other than rage. He felt purpose. So he's alive, he muttered, almost to himself. The doctor nodded shakily. He never died. He's been watching you, waiting for you to fall apart. Peterson's eyes darkened like storm clouds. He'll wish he stayed dead. Outside, the rain began to fall, whispering against the roof like 1,000 warnings. Peterson stepped into it, the wind slicing through his coat. He didn't flinch. He felt alive again, dangerous again. Every raindrop carried her name. Every gust of wind carried his vow. He would burn the world if he had to. No man would hide her from him. Back at the mansion, the night was quiet. The baby slept in a crib carved from mahogany, his tiny hand curled around Peterson's finger. For a moment, the war outside seemed far away. Peterson looked down at his son, the living proof of Vina's love, and whispered, "I'll bring her back, no matter what it costs." The baby stirred, a soft coo escaping his lips, as if answering him. It was enough to harden Peterson's resolve. He turned toward the window, staring out at the rain-washed darkness. Thunder rumbled across the sky like distant gunfire. Something flickered at the edge of his vision. Movement in the garden. His hand went instinctively to the gun on the table. He stepped closer to the glass, eyes narrowing. Through the curtain of rain, a figure stood at the gate, tall, still, familiar. Lightning cracked, illuminating a face Peterson knew too well. Adam, alive, and smiling. Peterson's breath stilled. For a moment, the world shrank to a heartbeat. Adam was drenched, his hair plastered to his forehead, his coat torn. But in his hand, he held something that froze Peterson's blood. A photograph smeared with blood. Peterson pushed open the doors, stepping into the storm. Rain drenched him instantly, but he didn't care. "Where is she?" he shouted. Adam raised the photograph slowly, his smirk cutting through the rain. "Closer than you think, boss," he said, "but you'll never reach her alive." Every instinct screamed at Peterson to shoot. Yet something in Adam's tone, mocking, certain, stopped him. He could see the blood dripping from the photo, mixing with the rain. It wasn't old. It was fresh. "Whose blood is that?" Peterson growled. Adam tilted his head. "Hers. Or maybe yours. Depends who gets there first." Peterson took a step forward, but Adam vanished into the storm's veil. Only the sound of his laughter remained, swallowed by thunder. Peterson bent, picking up the photo from the mud. Vina's face stared back at him. Eyes closed, lips pale, a smear of crimson at the corner of her mouth. He clenched the photo until it tore between his fingers. Inside the mansion, the baby began to cry. The sound pierced through the rain, raw and desperate. Peterson turned, heart pounding, instincts flaring. He sprinted back inside, each step echoing through the halls like gunshots. The nursery door was open. The crib was empty. For a moment, time stopped. Then rage erupted through him, like fire through oil. "No!" The roar shook the walls. He tore through the rooms, overturning furniture, calling the guards, the storm raging outside like a reflection of his fury. But there was no sign of his son, only the echo of that soft cry fading into silence. He slammed his fist against the wall, blood streaking across the paint. The photo of Vina burned in his mind, the taunt in Adam's eyes replaying like a curse. He realized now this wasn't just revenge, it was a war for blood, for family, for everything that still made him human. The storm howled louder, lightning spilling through the windows. Peterson stood in the chaos, rain dripping from his hair, breathing hard. Somewhere out there, Vina was alive, and his son was in danger, and Adam was pulling the strings of hell itself. He raised his gun, voice low but fierce. "You took my peace," he whispered to the storm. "Now I'll take your world." His reflection in the rain-streaked window looked back at him, a man stripped of mercy, shaped by loss, forged by love. The hunt wasn't over. It had just begun, and far beyond the mansion gates, under a broken streetlight, a woman in a soaked hospital gown whispered his name through the wind. Her voice trembled with pain and hope. But Peterson couldn't hear her. Not yet. Outside, thunder cracked once more, revealing Adam's shadow watching from a nearby rooftop, holding the blood-stained locket that once rested on Vina's neck. 7. The rain hadn't stopped since that night. It came down like punishment. Heavy and endless, soaking the streets until the world blurred into gray. Peterson drove through it, eyes fixed on the road, the photograph of Vina torn but still clenched in his fist. His knuckles were white, veins standing out against his skin. The city's lights streaked past, but he barely saw them. His mind was a storm, roaring with only one name, Vina. Every drop of rain against the windshield reminded him of her tears, of the night she begged him not to find her, but she didn't know him anymore. He was a man possessed, haunted, stripped of everything but one burning purpose, to bring her back and destroy the monster who took her. The baby's cry still echoed in his ears, each sound a dagger of guilt. He had failed to protect his son, failed her again, but not this time. This time, Adam would pay. Peterson's car screeched to a halt near the outskirts of the city, where the streets turned to mud and decay. The GPS tracker on his phone flickered, a signal traced to a forgotten part of town. A red dot blinked on the screen, faint but steady. His jaw tightened. That was it. He stepped out, boots sinking into the wet ground, and felt the cold wind slice through his coat. The place was dead silent except for the whisper of rain against metal. Then he saw it. A faint light burning in the distance, barely visible through the mist. An old villa half collapsed, its walls scarred by time and fire. He moved closer, every instinct on high alert. His gun was drawn, safety off. The iron gate creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, the courtyard was overgrown with weeds, puddles reflecting flashes of lightning. There were footprints in the mud, fresh ones, small, feminine. His pulse spiked. Vina. He moved silently, like a shadow, every step calculated. The front door was ajar, and the faint scent of smoke drifted out. Inside, candles flickered across the floor, their light trembling against the cracked walls. The air was thick with something metallic. Blood. Peterson's eyes darted around, tracing the streaks of red smeared across the floorboards. His chest tightened. Then he heard it, a soft sound like a chain dragging across the floor. He followed it down a narrow corridor, each step echoing like a heartbeat. The walls were damp, covered in mold, the ceiling sagging from years of neglect. He reached a heavy door at the end of the hall, half closed, a faint light seeping from underneath. He pushed it open and froze. Vina sat in the corner, her wrists bound by rusted chains, her hair matted, her hospital gown soaked and torn. Her face was pale, bruised, but unmistakably hers. Her eyes lifted slowly at the sound of his breath, disbelief flickering through the hollow darkness within them. "Peterson?" Her voice cracked like glass. For a moment, he couldn't move. The world stopped spinning. His chest ached, his throat burned. "Vina?" he whispered, stepping forward. She flinched, pulling back against the chains. "You shouldn't have come," she said weakly. "You don't understand. He's watching. He always is." Peterson knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he reached for the shackles. "I don't care," he said, voice raw with emotion. "You think I'd let him keep you here?" The chains were heavy, biting into her skin. He gritted his teeth, ripped one loose with a surge of strength, then another, until her wrists were free. She collapsed into his arms, trembling, her tears mingling with the rain still dripping from his coat. "I'd burn the world again for you," he murmured, his forehead pressed against hers. But then, a slow, deliberate clap cut through the silence. Peterson's head snapped up. In the doorway stood Adam, his smile cruel and cold. His coat was dark, soaked through, his eyes gleaming like a predator's. "Touching," Adam said softly. "Truly, the beast finally remembers he has a heart." He stepped forward, the barrel of his gun glinting under the candlelight. "But she's not your Vina anymore, boss. She's mine now." Peterson rose, shielding Vina behind him. His gun was already in his hand. "You should have stayed dead," he said, voice low, steady, deadly. Adam's smirk widened. "Death's boring. Besides, I had unfinished business. With you, with her, with that pretty little son of yours." Vina gasped, her hand tightening on Peterson's sleeve. "What did you do to him?" she cried, but Adam only tilted his head. "Let's just say, the boy is the reason you're both still breathing. For now." The room grew colder. The rain outside battered the windows like fists. Peterson's finger tightened on the trigger. "If you've touched him," Adam laughed. "If I have, what will you do, boss? Kill me? You've already tried that once. Didn't work out too well, did it?" The candles flickered violently as thunder cracked. Adam circled them slowly, his voice smooth and venomous. "You think love makes you strong, but it's your weakness. You always choose her over logic, over the empire, over everything. And that's why you'll lose both." Peterson's eyes followed his every move. "You talk too much," he said. "Let's finish what you started." The silence after that was unbearable, thick, electric. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. Then, without warning, Adam fired. The bullet whizzed past Peterson's ear, shattering a mirror behind him. Vina screamed. Peterson lunged forward, returning fire. Sparks flew as bullets tore through the walls. The candles went out, plunging the room into darkness, lit only by lightning. "Peterson!" Vina cried, but he couldn't see her anymore, only Adam's silhouette flashing between the shadows. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Glass shattered. "You can't protect her forever," Adam's voice echoed. "You never could." Peterson dove behind a pillar, his breath ragged, his heart pounding. He could taste the iron of blood on his tongue. He waited for the next flash of lightning, then moved. His gun fired once, twice. One bullet hit stone. The second found flesh. Adam staggered, clutching his side, but grinned even through the pain. "Still got it, boss," he hissed. Peterson approached slowly, his gun raised, the rain outside now falling harder, drumming against the roof. "This ends tonight." Adam laughed weakly. "You really think it's that easy? You kill me, you'll never find your son." The words froze Peterson mid-step. His hand trembled, grip loosening slightly. "Where is he?" he demanded. Adam's smile was faint, twisted. "Ask her," he whispered, nodding toward Vina. Peterson turned, confusion flashing in his eyes. Vina's face was pale, her lips trembling. "Peterson, she began, but Adam took the chance. He raised his gun, firing one last shot. The sound split the air. Then, silence. 2 gunshots echoed, but only one man fell. The candles flickered weakly, smoke curling through the air. Peterson stood still, his gun smoking, his breath heavy. Across from him, Adam lay motionless, his eyes open, the faintest smile still carved into his lips. But the question he'd left behind hung heavier than the rain outside. Vina crawled toward Peterson, her hands shaking. "You don't understand," she whispered, tears cutting paths down her dirty cheeks. "It's not over. He's not the only one." Peterson looked down at her, chest heaving, eyes burning with rage and confusion. "Then start talking," he said, voice breaking. A distant explosion shook the ground. The villa's windows shattered, flames flickering through the cracks. Vina's face went white. "He's already started," she said. Outside, far beyond the storm, the city lights flickered, and somewhere in the chaos a baby's cry echoed through the wind. Peterson froze, realizing the sound wasn't just in his head, it was real. His son was alive and still within Adam's reach. The villa burned behind them, its walls collapsing under the weight of years and vengeance. Flames clawed their way into the night, devouring everything that had once been a cage. Smoke curled through the shattered windows, turning the storm into a veil of red and gold. Peterson stood over Adam's body, chest heaving, gun still warm in his hand. The rain hissed against the fire, sending up plumes of steam that blurred the edges of reality. Adam lay motionless, his smirk frozen, his eyes wide, the arrogance finally gone. For a long moment, Peterson just stared, his mind empty, the roar of the flames matching the pounding of his heart. It was done. The man who had haunted him, hunted him, and stolen everything he loved was gone. Yet victory tasted like ash. Behind him, Vina struggled to her feet, her wrists still raw from the chains. She swayed, one hand gripping the wall for balance. "Peterson," she whispered, her voice breaking. He turned immediately, rushing to her side. She looked fragile, as though the fire might swallow her whole if he let go. He caught her, pulling her against his chest, his arms locking around her like a vow. "It's over," he breathed, his voice low, almost pleading, like if he said it enough times, it might become true. But Vina shook her head, tears glinting in the dim light. "No," she whispered, her words trembling. "It's never over in your world. You kill one devil, another takes his place." Her gaze drifted to Adam's body, then to the flames eating away the room. "Your world doesn't end. It only burns." Peterson's eyes softened, grief folding into tenderness. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing away the soot and tears. "Then I'll build a new one," he said quietly. "Just for you, for us. No more blood, no more ghosts." Lightning split the sky, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. The fire reflected in their eyes, his wild and broken, hers filled with fear and fragile hope. Vina leaned into his touch, her body trembling. "You can't just erase what we've done," she whispered. "You can't undo the pain." "I don't want to undo it," he said, his voice raw. "I want to live through it, with you." The words hung between them, heavy and real. He lowered his head slowly, pressing his forehead to hers. Their breaths mingled, their hearts beating out of sync but reaching for the same rhythm. He kissed her then, not like before, not out of hunger or rage, but like a man drowning, clutching the one thing that could still save him. His lips traced the bruises on her skin like apologies. Each kiss was a promise. Each touch was a confession. Vina's hands trembled as she gripped his coat, pulling him closer. She could feel the tremor in his body, the tension of years spent fighting shadows. His heart thundered against her chest, desperate and alive. "You shouldn't love me," she whispered against his lips. "I'm broken." He smiled faintly, a sad kind of smile. "Then we're both broken. But maybe, together, we can still breathe." Outside, the storm began to fade, the rain softening to a drizzle. The fire's glow dimmed, leaving behind a faint, trembling warmth. They stood there amidst the ruins, two souls stitched together by pain, love, and everything in between. Hours passed before the first light of dawn began to break through the smoke. The world outside was quiet again. Peterson carried Vina out of the villa, her head resting against his shoulder, her eyes half closed. His car waited at the gate, dented, soaked, but still standing. He placed her gently in the passenger seat, then glanced back one last time at the burning wreckage. The past was turning to ash behind him, and he didn't look back again. The drive back was silent. Vina's head leaned against the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. Peterson's hand rested on the wheel, but his eyes kept drifting to her. Every mile between them and that place felt like another chain breaking loose. By the time the city lights came into view, he could almost breathe again. At the mansion, the world felt different. The storm had passed completely, leaving the air crisp and clean. The heavy iron gates swung open as they drove in, the guards stepping back in stunned silence. They had believed both their boss and the woman lost to the fire. Peterson ignored their stares, his focus fixed on the front doors. He carried Vina inside, his arms steady but his heart shaking. The house that once echoed with loneliness now seemed to hum with life again. The faint sound of soft breathing drifted through the hall. The baby, their son. The nurse stood near the crib, startled at the sight of them. "Sir, I didn't think you'd—" she began, but Peterson only nodded. "It's fine, you can go." The nurse hesitated, then left quietly, closing the door behind her. Vina moved forward slowly, her legs weak but her spirit stronger than he'd ever seen it. She reached the crib, tears spilling freely now. Her baby lay there, wrapped in a blanket, his tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. "He's so beautiful," she whispered, her voice breaking with awe and grief all at once. Peterson stood behind her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "He's ours," he said softly. "Our proof that something pure can still come out of all this." Vina turned to him, eyes shining through the tears. "What if this peace doesn't last?" she asked. "What if the world comes for us again?" Peterson looked out the window, the morning sun spilling over the horizon. "Then we'll fight again," he said simply, "but this time not for vengeance, for us, for him." For the first time in years, a small, genuine smile curved her lips. She leaned into him, resting her head on his chest. The sound of his heartbeat was steady, strong. She closed her eyes, letting it lull her into a fragile sense of safety. As the hours passed, the mansion filled with a silence that wasn't lonely anymore. The fire outside had died, and the rain had washed away the ashes. Peterson sat by the window, his arm around Vina, the baby asleep in her lap. The night they had survived felt like a different lifetime. He looked down at her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She looked peaceful, even with the bruises, even with the pain that still lingered in her eyes. "We'll be okay," he whispered, more to himself than to her. And for a moment, he believed it. Outside, the world was calm. The city was waking to a new dawn, unaware of the war that had ended in the shadows. Inside, Peterson held the two things he had nearly lost forever, the woman he loved and the child who carried both their hearts. He kissed Vina's forehead gently, whispering, "You're safe now." She smiled faintly, eyes still closed. "No more running?" "No more," he promised. They sat together, watching the sunrise spill across the marble floors, painting everything in gold. The sound of their son's soft breathing filled the room, a rhythm of peace they had both forgotten how to hear. For the first time, Peterson allowed himself to exhale. But just as the world seemed to settle, a vibration broke the silence. His phone buzzed on the table beside him. He frowned slightly, reaching for it. The screen lit up, the bright glow cutting through the morning calm. A message blinked on the display. No number, just a name. Vina's sister. His pulse quickened. He hadn't heard that name in years. His thumb hovered over the screen before opening the message. The text was short, just one line. "You killed Adam, but you didn't kill me." The air shifted, suddenly cold, heavy. Peterson stared at the words, the color draining from his face. His reflection in the glass looked haunted again, the peace shattered before it had even settled. He looked at Vina, who was still asleep, unaware. A chill ran down his spine as he turned his gaze back to the window. The sun was rising, but in its light a shadow flickered across the garden gate. A figure, still, watching. Peterson's hand tightened around the phone. His world once again teetered on the edge. Outside, the wind stirred the roses in the garden. One petal, red as blood, drifted against the window pane as the message burned on the screen. "You killed Adam. But you didn't kill me. Thank you for listening till the very end. Please subscribe the channel, like the video, and support me. Your love keeps heart-woven tales alive. Some stories aren't about love found, they're about love reborn in the ashes of betrayal. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Heart-Woven Tales. Press the bell icon to never miss the next twist, and share your thoughts below, because sometimes the next tale begins right where the last one ends.